All right, welcome to the July 31st, 2024 meeting of the Redmond Planning Commission. I'd like to call this meeting to order. We'll start with a roll call. Commissioner Aparna.
Present.
Commissioner Coleman.
Present.
Commissioner Copley.
Present.
Commissioner Gagne.
Present.
Vice Chair Woodier.
Present.
And I am Chair Weston. Commissioner Van Nyman is excused. I'd like to thank the following staff for being present tonight: Ian Lefcourt, Becky Fry, Kim Dietz, Chris Wyatt, Sarah Fee Allen, and any others that I am missing. I'd look for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you. That's approved. Next, I look for a motion to approve the meeting minutes from July 10th.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And that is approved.
Aye.
Next is time to hear public comment and items from the audience. All right, and you can start with your name and address.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm David Morton, Redmond 98053. To protect Redmond's critical aquifer recharge area, or CARA, it's vital to restrict or prohibit specific land uses and activities that threaten the aquifer's water quality and recharge capacity. Key restrictions should target the following uses and activities. First, industrial and commercial activities, chemical manufacturing and storage that involve hazardous materials, including organic and inorganic chemicals, plastics and resins, pharmaceuticals, cleaning compounds, paints and lacquers, and agricultural chemicals can contaminate groundwater through spills or leaks. Fuel storage and gasoline stations with underground and ground-level tanks for storing petroleum products pose contamination risks from leaks. And mining and quarrying disrupt natural geology, leading to contamination and altered groundwater flow patterns. Second, agricultural and recreational practices. Intensive use of pesticides and fertilizers by golf courses and farms can lead to harmful contamination of the aquifer. Prohibiting, limiting, or regulating their use within the CARA is essential. And large-scale animal farming produces waste that can seep into groundwater, introducing nitrates, bacteria, and other pollutants. Third, waste management. Landfills and waste disposal sites can be sources of leachate containing hazardous substances. Proper siting and stringent management are necessary, and prohibiting hazardous waste storage and disposal within the CARA prevents potential leaks and spills detrimental to water quality. Fourth, residential and urban development. Poorly managed or failing septic systems can leach contaminants into groundwater. It's crucial to ensure proper maintenance and to limit new installations. High-density development and increases impervious surfaces and reduces natural aquifer recharge. Restricting high-density developments and promoting green infrastructure like permeable pavements within the CARA can enhance recharge and reduce runoff. And business and service. For decades, dry cleaners have dumped toxic perchloroethylene, or PERC, down drains onto porous floors and directly onto the ground. Most dry cleaners in the U.S. use PERC today. Are the dry cleaners that are in Redmond's CARA aware that they are prohibited from using PERC? In conclusion, implementing these restrictions and promoting sustainable practices will safeguard Redmond's aquifer, ensuring a clean and reliable drinking water source for current and future residents. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Weston, I apologize. Just to double check, did we approve the minutes?
Yes,
Perfect. Thank you.
for July 10th.
The most recent one, yes. The one that was in the agenda. Got it. Thank you.
Yes, we did. We were efficient. All right. Is there anyone else for public comment?
There is no one else who signed up for public comment.
Amazing. Okay, so next we will move on to our public hearing on the addendum to the Redmond Zoning Code Rewrite Phase 3 for the legislative amendments. And I would introduce Kim Dietz.
Good evening, Commissioners. And with me online is David Lee, Tim McCarg, and Todd Rawlings, part of the team for this amendment package. I'd like to share my screen. So just as a reminder, the Commission had a briefing on this item last week, and this evening you are holding a public hearing. 2 amendments are before you that are an addendum to your original recommendation to the City Council on the legislative amendments for conformance with recent state legislation. Tonight you are reviewing vesting and administrative modification, some amendments that staff has provided in your packet. The vesting provisions, as shown here, are mainly for clarification, streamlining the city's process, and coordination with Senate Bill 5290. And you can see some of the changes that are included in this. One particular change is that the land use controls in effect at the time would apply to the permit at the time of approval. The expirations under the terms of the City Council would apply for type 4 and 5 permits, and the permit would be coordinated with the building permit. Short plats, binding site plans would have approval at the final plat or when they are recorded. And then finally, there is an extension, and the clarification is that there would be one extension of vesting for a 1-year period. There is criteria associated with that, and the criteria would be maintained. On the administrative modification, the amendments, again, are for clarification, streamlining the process, and for coordination with Senate Bill 5290. The one change here I just wanted to point out is that if the permit type rather would be a type 1 versus a type 2, but there is a caveat that if the project is modifying more than 10% or 6,000 gross square feet based on the approved conditions, then the applicant would follow the type 2 process, which is what is followed today. Okay. And basically, the administrative modification would look to make sure that the project is still being compliant. There's a list provided here which includes fire access, building and site standards, transportation access, landscaping, and parking and height, just to give an example. Okay. So with that, I'd like to turn it back for the public hearing portion.
All right, so I am going to open the public hearing. And Ian, do we have anyone to comment? No. Okay. So in that case, I'm going to close the verbal and written portion of the public hearing. And for a study session, back to staff.
Yeah, so there are 3 items that the Commission identified last week. Let me share your issues matrix with you, which is also in your meeting packet for this evening. Okay, so this is your issue matrix, and just a reminder that this portion of the matrix, the addendum, is added on to the end of your previous matrix. And so this starts on, I believe it's page 10. So the first item has already been closed. This was by Commissioner Aparna, and she indicated by email that this one was okay to be closed. So the 2 that are remaining open, Commissioner Coleman had asked about the annual volume of permits that would be affected by legislation or the recommended amendments. So I took a snapshot and I used our permitting system to pull out just different types of permits. So you can see here that I have several in the type 2 as well as the type 1, and you can see the volume. So this is just providing an example just to give an estimate of volume. So
Yeah, thank you. I was interested, like, how much time as well. I probably would have asked that last week, but in terms of volume and time save, like, what does that look like approximately? Do you know?
The time saving that we are going to achieve is probably mostly going to be associated with the process improvement efforts that are underway. And I spoke with the lead for that, who is Todd Rawlings. He's online, but just to give a general sense, the consultant that he is working with is in their inquiry phase right now. So we've yet to identify specific changes in order to know what the time saving is going to be. But in a general sense, why don't, Dave, if you would like to come online and just give a general sense of the current timing that it would take for a type 1 or a type 2?
Sure. Generally, these things kind of vary all over the place. Generally, for a more intensive site plan, which includes potentially a type 2 multifamily mixed-use development, we're looking anywhere from 6 to 9 months, potentially even more, kind of depending on what the issues are. If we're not running into critical areas issues or decontamination of a site, for example, if it's like in a care area and they were a let's say a gas station before and they have to remove a bunch of contaminants in the ground, that review could take anywhere from I would say about 9 to 12 months for just the site plan entitlement portion. For things that are even bigger nature, like type 5 projects that go to the city council, we're generally looking at anywhere from like 12 to 16 months, I would say, to run it from application all the way to the hearing for council. So that's kind of generally, and sorry, and let me back up also with things like administrative modification where we already have a site plan entitlement and they're slightly tweaking the site plan or tweaking architectural features. We're looking at anywhere from 3 to 4 months for something like that. It could be potentially faster depending on the changes that are necessary.
Yeah, so that sounds like that's the current situation. So
That's current, yes. And the future situation will be restricted by the state legislation. So we have 3 tiers, whether notice is required, whether a public hearing is required, whether the combination is required. Now that time frame that is legislated is when the city has it in their hands. So what Dave Lee just described is the total time. And the city would not be actively working on a permit during all of that period. There are times when it returns to the applicant in order to answer questions or refine particular submittal material. But generally, we are going to be limited to a shorter time period than what we are experiencing now.
Yeah, and I think that what Kim just mentioned is pretty critical. These timelines only take into account the amount of time it has with the city for city review. So anytime the city issues out comments or corrections, that time clock is then stopped until a resubmittal happens.
yeah, so there's, I mean, the common denominator is time, right? Here is what we're asking about. I'm just curious, in terms of then the streamline the city's going to do, like how much time will it save somebody who's got an application?
Todd, if you're able to come online, do you have any ideas yet on the table that you could describe? Maybe if there's a particular process that you've been exploring thus far and are able to estimate a savings?
Yeah, it's, we are looking at ways to reduce. It's just a little bit early to be able to say for sure what those savings are going to be. But just know that, like I said, the main things are putting the time clock in place so that we can stop it when in the hands of the customers. And, we can report back when we've got a little bit better idea of what the savings are going to be.
Okay. My question is just because that seems like the whole intent of the process to save time, but I can't be too sure like what that actually means apart from we're changing our process, but what does it mean to residents and builders and others?
Well, the timeframe is specific to the applicant.
That's what I meant.
So-
Whoever's the applicant is, like,
Yes.
what's the time saving of doing all of the changes?
Yes. It is significant. We are looking at significant process changes in order to meet those timeframes that are required by the state. And if we do miss them, we will need to be paying a portion of the application fees back to the applicant. We'll need to reimburse certain amounts of fees depending on the length of time that we are late. So the city is looking very carefully, a lot of cities and counties are doing that, looking very carefully at what changes can be in place January 1st in order for them to be implemented right away. So it's it's a big combination. There's staff training that's going to be involved in this. You were seeing the regulations, but there's a lot that is related to our process, like how we do work on a day-to-day basis. We have standard operating procedures, we have templates. We're looking at a whole scale, a whole system change here to make sure that we meet the deadlines.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Great. So close?
Yeah, and we can close that.
Lovely. Thank you.
And then the last one also is Commissioner Coleman, and this question was information describing the automated procedures, and I hope that I have this correct, that the permit review would have in comparison to what involvement is already provided. So when looking at the different ways that the permit is reviewed. So just to point out what we just described in the last one is not as much automated today. What is automated are the workflows. So our permitting system allows an applicant to submit the material, and then it allows for certain notifications to happen so that David Lee is a manager of the group that reviews. He receives a notice, and then through the system, he is able to provide, he's able to assign that to a particular planner to start their review. They receive a notice, but a lot of the review is looking at the material and comparing it to our code. So that's a large amount of time. There are some templates that are embedded into the system. There are some templates that aren't yet embedded into the system. There's a lot of interaction that happens between staff because you have people that are reviewing in Dave's group, but also in other groups through the city, for example, fire. And so there needs to be interaction with those that takes place both ways, inside the system, but also outside the system. So there are some procedures that are automated, but not all of them. But I'm also going to turn to Todd again because there might be some things that he is looking at in particular. Todd, did you have anything to add about the future conditions?
We are looking at, sorry, there's some background noise. We are looking at making improvements to our EnerGov automation system and flow. But at this time, it's just in the early stages. So I'll have to report back to the commission a later date when we know what the changes will be.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. I was just curious, like what the automation things you're going to looking ahead is going to be. So see when that comes back. But yeah, I'm good with these questions.
Great.
Thank you.
All right. So that, I believe, brings us to the end of our issues matrix for this. The way that I want to go forward, so normally we would vote on a recommendation, and then staff would take time until the next meeting to come back with a report. Due to our time frame here in our schedule, staff has actually already produced a draft report, so that was part of our packet this week. And so if people are interested in making the recommendation, what I actually would like to do is both recommendation and the report approval, since we have that there and we don't have any new modifications that came up as a result of the public hearing. All right, so in that case, I look for a motion to ask staff to recommend approval to City Council of the addendum to the Redmond zoning code, rewrite Phase 3 legislative amendments, and approve the draft report.
So moved.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Right.
Great, that's approved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As far as the report, is that something that you would like to coordinate signing, or is that something that you would be signing this evening?
I think, oh, great, we have it here, so I can sign it this evening.
Okay, yes, yes.
Lovely,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you very much for your review, and have a good evening.
All right, so next up, we have our study session on the summer 2024 omnibus and wrap-up package for Redmond 2050, and we are bringing up Becky Fry.
Good evening, Commissioners. So this is another one that we would like to see if we can get all the way through report approval tonight, but it'll be up to you as you go through the discussion if you have anything else you'd like to keep on your issues matrix. So, oh, you pulled it up, Ian? Okay, great. So the issues matrix has a couple of things that are still open. The first one, EV12, we had a proposed revision from Van Nyman. Van Nyman did send an email saying that she was okay with closing this. So
Great,
we can
so
go
we'll
ahead and
close.
close it.
Yep.
And then we go down. Most of these are closed, so I'm just going to skip back down. Let's see, which is the next one? Ian, I think the next one is your housing one, which is number 30. Okay, so this one is the neighborhood residential. We did get an email confirmation from Commissioner Pardo that she was okay to close it, but like to see if anybody else wants any other comment to close it.
Commissioner Parna.
I wanted to say that I would like to close this issue, but I also think that the documentation provided last week was excellent, and it should go either as part of the Planning Commission document report or as standalone attachments to council, because it provides extremely valuable context. The numbers, the rationale, everything is there, and thank you for providing such a detailed document in no time, pretty much. So thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to second that, actually, and I'd love if information like that was in the packet. Like the first, I know that there's been conversation about this. I think we're all in agreement here, but there's so many numbers. It's very helpful to be able to read it. This was fairly dense, and it really provides a lot of extra information to the code. So I agree that highlighting it a little bit more might be helpful. Yeah, exactly. All right, so you're ready to close?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Commissioner Copley.
There was one section on page 19. This is, I believe, issue 30. Near the bottom, it says single-family homes will have same payment in lieu dollar per square foot value as all detached structures. Was there a number on that? I was just curious what that number was per square foot for the payment in lieu if they're not developing affordable housing.
Yes, there is, and that number would be updated either annually or biannually. So there's two pieces, right? There's the rate, kind of the baseline per square foot fee, and then for any individual home, you would multiply that, of course, by the square footage to get to it. And let me see if I can pull that number up for you real quick.
And then the last remaining item is the very last one, is item number 35. In response to the discussion and the community comments that came in at the public hearing last week, our development services staff has been working on a proposed revision. And so I'm going to introduce Tim tonight to walk you through the proposed change that they have worked out. Tim, are you available?
I am ready and waiting. So hello, everyone. Good evening, commissioners. Tarek, principal planner. So we took I'm sorry, my camera is not, there we go. We listened to the public comments that were provided. So just as a refresher, there were a couple comments provided at last week's meeting regarding the transitional provisions in Overlake, and those comments were very similar. One was by phone, one was in writing, but basically the comments focused on the fact that the draft language essentially created a catch-22 for certain types of projects in Overlake. Those projects being parcels that are greater than 3 acres. And the basis for the issue is that sites that are greater than 3 acres in Overlake are required to go through the master plan development process, the MPD process, and also required to do a development agreement in conjunction with that MPD. So the issue with the previous language was that we did not fully consider the implications of not permitting any type of applicability of the transition provisions for Type 5 projects. So what we have done is drafted this language. The primary change is in section A1 there, applicability. So what we have clarified is that in addition to the Type 2 and 3 permits that were already in the transitional provisions, we are also allowing it for certain types of Type 5 projects. Those are, what the requirement is that a project larger than 3 acres can submit their master plan development and development agreement application. However, that application needs to include a site plan entitlement or site plan entitlement applications, one or more, for all the buildings that are proposed in the master plan. So this will allow developers who have a controlling interest in parcels greater than 3 acres to submit that. However, those site plans are still going to be required to adhere to the same milestones and timeframes as any other Type 2 site plan entitlement. So this allows them to submit, propose their project, use the transitional provisions for their project, and not essentially bar the Type 5 application from even being submitted. So that's the solution. We have provided this to both of the parties that provided comments at last week's hearing, or last week's meeting, more properly. We've engaged with one of those parties. The other, unfortunately, is out of the office this week. The one party, not to speak for her, but she appreciated the amendments, and she agreed with the change here, and stated that was acceptable to her based upon her client's intentions.
Great.
So,
can I ask one clarifying question on that? What are the implications for vesting?
So this would allow vesting. So these transitional provisions are allowing vesting for projects. You have to go through the steps here. Step 2 is to submit a complete application and have a determination of completeness issued, and also have a determination by either be scheduled for a design review board meeting, or in the alternative, have your planner indicate that you have provided all of the required design review board materials and that it is ready to go to the design review board. That's the first step. Then subsequent to that, by January 31st, 2025, the applicant for that needs to submit in writing a request to continue to be processed under the existing, as of today, zoning code regulations. And then they need to go through that process, meet all of the timeframes required by the process, and ultimately they need to submit complete building permit applications for all of the buildings proposed by those land use applications by December 31st of 2026.
Okay.
And that will vest them. So once those complete building permits are submitted and accepted by the city, they will be vested to the current, as of today, zoning code and land use controls in effect. So they can then proceed with their building permit. Those basically have their own kind of life cycle. You have to do something. You have to initiate construction generally within 180 days of the issuance of the building permit. You can request extensions if necessary. to keep that permit alive. But essentially, it just comes down to performing and constructing the buildings subsequent to the issuance of the building permits.
Okay, great. Commissioner Aparna.
I actually had a follow-up question. So they are held to certain calendar dates based on this vesting schedule. So if they don't meet that, then does it go back to the new code and the new system? Would
That's
would
correct.
it revert back? Okay.
Yes. So,
Thank you.
so they would essentially have no rights to be processed under the current land use controls, and they would then be required to comply with the land use controls in effect as of the date that happened.
Got it. Thank you.
Commissioner Copley.
If they do comply and they need to have a design review done, and we are planning to abolish the design review board, how would that work?
That's a good question, and that's why that provision has two kind of roads for compliance, and we've had numerous potential applicants inquire about that. Frequently these things go right up to the wire, unfortunately, and so recognizing that the plan, at least what is proposed today, hasn't been decided yet, is to abolish the design review board. What we would do is issue that letter to them, which is the second part of 2B there, having received a determination from staff that a design review board meeting is ready to be scheduled. So what that means, what we've explained to potential applicants, is that you submit your complete design review board package. So we have a checklist for what needs to be provided in that package. And if you've provided that to us with your application, we will review that as part of completeness and issue a letter to you indicating that you are ready to be scheduled as part of the completeness determination.
Becky.
Yeah, I just want to remind everyone, the reason why we've added 505 provisions here is because this allows additional flexibility. These projects, typically, if they come in today, wouldn't get approved until after the new code is done, just from this cycle of review. And so this allows projects to come in between now and the end of the year and not have to start over because they haven't made it all the way through completion. So this is just trying to be a little bit more flexible and allow people to proceed. But in the end, they still need to actually come to some sort of completion and come into the new code if they don't follow through. So this is just, it's intended to be a little bit more flexible for things that are currently moving forward that they want to just keep moving forward. But there are a vast number of people that we've been talking to that are holding on to their projects and want to come into the new code. So that's the flip side too. So this is for folks that want to proceed, but there's also a whole bunch of folks that are just waiting for the new code.
So that actually starts to speak to my next question, which is how many projects roughly are we talking? Is this like fewer than a dozen, quite a bit more than a dozen?
That would be that want to use the transitional provisions?
Yes.
So I would estimate there's probably, just working off the top of my head, there are probably 4 or 5 projects that have already been submitted and are, either substantially or partially the way through the review process, but they would be able to take advantage of this. Several of those projects have already submitted building permits, which gives them vested status. So it's really moot for those projects that have submitted a building permit. And we've been speaking with approximately 2 and maybe 3 developers who are interested in submitting something between today and December 31st of this year.
Yeah, less than 10 total.
Okay, that's really helpful.
Yeah.
Vice Chair Woodyer? Oh, sorry, misinterpreted, sorry. It is good. Commissioner Copley?
Just wanted to give Ian an opportunity to come back on that number if you had that.
Yep, with the numbers that were pulled from Q2 of this year, it'd be about 30 feet per square foot. But again, this would be updated continually, so it balances out with that assumed 80% AMI unit.
And to confirm, $30 per square foot.
$30 per square foot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so back to this one. Do we have additional questions or comments? All right, I'm prepared to close.
So if you're comfortable with this, we would just recommend that with your motion for approval, you would just mention as amended this evening.
Yep.
And that closes out all of the issues matrix items for this item. Similar, again, to the last item, we would like to see if we can get recommendation and report approval this evening, all in one motion, if you're comfortable with doing so.
Before we do that, I just wanted to hopefully bring up the memo really quickly that had the list of, there were multiple tables of everything that's in this omnibus package. And if we can just look at those very quickly, because this is a very long issues matrix. It's just really nice to see how everything came together. So if we could just do a slow scroll.
Yeah, that's the reason why I put the memo together, because we had some bits and pieces in a couple of different places, and this is just the omnibus package. This doesn't include everything, remember, because we're only looking at what's context for this.
Yep.
And again, most of these are minor edits. It was just some clarifications and cleanups. So, but there's still quite a few of them as a part of this package. So we had a number of just wordsmithing, a couple of minor updates, some revision to language in a lot of the different elements, but it's really just a handful of policies really that are impacted. So updated definitions, and a couple of appendices and just details added, including the housing technical appendix updates. And then for the zoning code amendments, again, they were impacted by a number of different things, and they are quite a numerous, but the biggest ones really were the information that was added around the neighborhood residential and the neighborhood multifamily. And then, again, there's quite a few just tweaks to 2112, the overlake, that were a result of the final testing. And that includes the language that you amended this evening in 505, but a couple of other items as well that were response to just clarifications. And so we've added that in there. There's a number of other things in here as well. So as you can see, the tables are quite long, and they seem to be never ending. But we do end with a number of revisions to definitions. And so we've got those and ready to go as well. And then also, there were the zoning map cleanups and just the last little pieces for all of the technical GIS updates for the zoning. And also, we've inserted the capital facilities plan, which is a requirement under the GMA to have a part of this package, and a very, very tiny edit to the TMP Appendix E, which is in response to a WashDOT request. So again, most of those edits were very minor, but there were some that did have some impacts for the community. So thank you so much for walking through all of this with us, but that's the package.
Thank you so much. So with that, I look for a motion to ask staff to recommend approval to City Council of the Summer 2024 Omnibus and Wrap-Up Package for Redmond 2050 and approve the draft report as amended this evening.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you so much, everyone. That's approved.
And staff has a thank you card to the Planning Commission. We'll pass it around. And we brought some apple cider and a couple of things in here. Thank you so much. This is a culmination of 4 years of work to actually have a plan. We're continuing with our code updates, but you have completed your work on the Redmond 2050 Comprehensive Plan and the Functional Plan updates. So thank you. So,
Thank you so much. Really appreciate this.
yeah.
All right, so we're going to do a last little bit of business. Any staff and commissioner updates?
We have our monthly update first.
Oh, do we? Excellent. Let's do that. Thank you for. I didn't get a copy of the agenda. Sorry.
So the monthly update, we're just doing a look ahead. There's in your packet, just walks through what's going to happen next with your recommendation for the package for the 2024. And then we just are introducing a little bit of what's coming in 2025 and how that's going to come to the Planning Commission once you get back from your vacation. And so I'm going to pull up our PowerPoint that we have for that. Thanks. Sorry, it wouldn't give me the share button. So we got, okay. Okay. So just wanted to let you know too, we're continuing to finalize this package. So there might be some additions or some changes. One of the things that we're working on right now is just what capacity we have to finish certain things in this year. So some things might be divided into chunks and moved further out or into different processes. So we will confirm the code package when we start to come back in September with you. But we wanted to give you a preliminary list of contents and know what to expect and how that will go through your review. There's a number of different categories. We have our brand new zones and the zoning consolidation will be completed. We have decided to move all of the incentives into a single chapter. There's a lot of overlap between the incentives throughout all the centers and it was just easier from a structural standpoint and a avoiding duplication standpoint to just have it all in one chapter. And then we have centers consistency work that we're doing on the design guidelines, open space and landscaping, and there's some work in there that we're working on. There's a number of use consideration updates and a few affordable housing. So I'm going to walk you through some of those things really, really high level because we're going to introduce the actual specifics of them in September. But the new and updated zones are Marymore and downtown. Those are pretty significant in some ways because it's consolidation, especially for downtown going from 12 to 3 zones. But then we also have our new mixed-use zones, which is consolidating basically everything else other than there are non-residential zones. So all of our design districts are going away. Our general commercial is going away. Our neighborhood, there's a number of different things that are just being combined. And so we're just going to have those new mixed-use zones. That'll streamline everything down. Again, we're going from 50 zoning districts to 20. So that will be happening. The one thing that is not in this package is one of those zones is conservation open space. And so that will happen at a later date. We're creating the zone from a mapping standpoint, but it is conservation open space. So we're just going to work on the actual zoning chapter when we have capacity to add that. And then there's a number of things that are just being streamlined. So keeping that in mind, including the fact that we're restructuring what the zoning code for those zones looks like. What is going to be included in the zone itself and what is going to be included in some other chapter, right? So we're streamlining the actual code structure, not just the number of zones that we're looking at. We're updating the street topology and public realm standards. That's a continuation of the work that we started with the overlay package. I won't go through a lot of this now, but in essence is we're just trying to make, again, each zone look the same information in the same order, in the same way, and we're trying to go to more of a map-based system and just streamlining so we don't have customized public realm standards and customized street standards so much where we can just use the same bits and pieces. So we're working on that moving forward. It's like a smart code, form-based code approach, but it's a hybrid. It's not like a full form-based code. Again, I mentioned we're doing a new incentives chapter. That's going to be incentives for basically everywhere. We're looking at a full, complete incentive package for downtown and Marymore, but we're also looking at incentives for our mixed-use zones and some citywide incentives as well. And so, for instance, one of the edits that you made in the omnibus package was adjusting the base max for neighborhood multifamily to 1.1, but we have also in the code that your max is 1.5. And so now we're building what that incentive structure to get from 1.1 to 1.5 would be, and that will be in that package. And so there's a couple of other things that we're looking at with that, but we'll go through all of that once our consultant is done. They're in the middle of their cost evaluation phase, so we brought them back to continue making sure that it's marketability and that we are scaling it appropriate. The center's consistent. We've talked about that quite a bit, especially as we went through open space and landscaping, that we know we're just phase 2, that work was just going to continue. From a use standpoint, one of the things that you're going to see that will look a little chaotic is our special use regulations are currently hidden in many different places. They could be in 2108. They could be a note in the table in 2104. They could be a note in a table in the zone, or it could not exist. And so there are a number of things that we're trying to do to streamline, and we've mentioned this at a previous study session too, is special regulations will be in 2104. That's going to be a lot of moving around. We're not going to be editing a lot of that, but we are going to move it to where people can find it easier. If it's a use regulation, if it's not a temporary use, we're going to try to have it in 2104. There are a few new things, though. I mentioned at our last meeting that we're doing a food truck court regulation, and that is going to be in there. There's a couple of other things that we're looking to do. Other changes in 2104, obviously we're continuing our work on our complete neighborhood implementation, and so we're going to see some edits to the tables in 2104. And then obviously we're going to fill out the rest of the zones. We're going to move them down to those new tables so that we can go to just 2 land use charts. And so everything above those 2 charts, except for the how to read it and those tools, is going to go away. And so by the time we're done, we'll just have those nice new 2 tables. A couple of things in here from an affordable housing standpoint. This is changes to the Redmond Municipal Code. I'll let Ian just kind of summarize those.
So as we recall, our mandatory inclusionary zoning affordability requirements are housed in Redmond Zoning Code 2120. However, our voluntary multifamily property tax exemption program is in the Redmond Municipal Code 3.38. So while this is a bit outside of the Planning Commission's actual purview, we feel that it's important contextual information because the bottom line program approach we've had for all of our IZ updates has been, where feasible, align that 8-year program parameter with the baseline MIZ so that it perfectly fits together, and thus we can move forward with more concrete financial modeling assumptions and help tailor that down. Now, part of the quirk is that, again, we're updating those different MFTE pieces as the actual Redmond 2050 zoning code pieces are updated. So it's also going to be a little bit staggered. But it's that same process that the commission has already reviewed going back to Overlake.
Can I ask a clarification on that? Do we approve this, or is it just informational?
Just
Yeah.
information.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. The municipal code updates just go straight to council.
Yes.
But we are going to include them in your package so that you understand how they all work together.
Good.
But in your Planning Commission report and recommendation, you would not see any RMC updates. Okay, so we are currently in drafting mode. We have been for quite a while. We have already started stakeholder discussions. We've had a number of workshops that we've talked to you about. We've had another mass timber stakeholder workshop looking at the incentive piece this month as well. We're going to continue to have those stakeholder and community engagement opportunities over the course of the next several months. And again, we're going to start the introduction of all of these items to the Planning Commission when you return in September. So we are aiming for getting as much as possible out by the end of August. There are some things that are going to take a little bit longer to finish drafting just because they're a little bit more complicated. So we'll release them probably in staggered stages. But we are going to have Planning Commission study sessions, several of them over the fall. We are aiming for a public hearing by the end of the year. So it may happen in November or December. It takes a little bit of time to finalize everything. We might have 2 public hearings, bring them in chunks like we've done before. It is going to be quite a big package again when you get done with it because so many things are moving. And just moving this special regulations into 2104 is just from a volume standpoint going to be many pages. So what we'll do is we'll make sure to, as your study session packages go through, we'll not include the things that are just moving. We'll highlight them and let you know that they're moving, but we won't put them in the packet so that you can just focus really on what's changing. But then when we come down to the actual final, you'll see the whole package all together with all of the red lines. Hopefully that'll just be easier.
That created interest. Commissioner Parna.
I really liked how you'd put in comments on the side. This was added. It really helped us look at what is there, what changed, or what moved, and anything like that. I know it's extra work, but it
Yeah, we
might
plan to
help us.
continue to do that process, yeah. If it's a change being made for X reason, we'll try to document that reason, yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate the way that was put together in the omnibus package. It was so much more clear than previous, and I know that was like a very broad set of changes, like this one probably will be, but it just was very easy to follow.
Luckily, in this particular case, there's going to be some pretty straightforward changes. They might be robust amount of changes, but the reason why it's changing is pretty clean. And so it should be easy for us to understand. Like a number of the things that we're doing are taking like 30 pages of text and putting it into a table, right? So there are a number of things that should be very easy to understand and move through. But again, just because we're consolidating some of the zones and so many zones are going to so few zones, there are a number of changes in the impacts. So we'll try to walk you through all of those. The Planning Commission will complete its public hearing by the end of the year, but we may not do report approval by the end of the year. It kind of depends on where you are with your study sessions, how many study sessions you need. But we do plan on starting council review after the first of the year with their study sessions. And again, we're aiming for a March adoption with this package. It could be sometime in the spring. Depends on really council agendas, which one we can get on. And so we're aiming for March, but it could be any number of meetings depending on how long they need for their process. So, but that's just a really, really high-level introduction and just what to expect from what's coming. Again, we'll introduce these more deeply. What are the actual moves? What is happening on each of these things? We're going to chunk that out, and in both of your September meetings, we'll talk through some of those changes in more detail. And then starting in October, you'll start to see the red lines, the actual changes themselves.
Commissioner Parna.
Just out of curiosity, are we seeing the end here, as in, March or spring of 25? We're seeing 2050 done?
Yes. So in spring of 2025, we will be completely done with the Redmond 2050 project. However, some of the things that we are starting in Redmond 2050 will continue on after that. Obviously, the full implementation of the Southeast Redmond Industrial District has a lot of work to do. We have to do a market study and a number of other things. And there's things that we are implementing now that will take several years to fully get up to speed. So just keeping that in mind, there are some things that aren't going to be fully wrapped up, but the actual Redmond 2050 project will be wrapped up. Those pieces will just be incorporated like in the next phase of the Redmond zoning code rewrite package or another special project that we'll bring forward. Like the industrial district will probably be a separate conversation.
Commissioner Parna.
So would that mean that when this is adopted next year, it goes to state and we just sign off saying, hey, we're done?
So no, once we are done, we go through a recertification process. So for instance, our centers have to be recertified, our downtown and our Overlake Center. And then we have to go through a review at the county level and at the Puget Sound Regional Council. And so there are some after pieces that will continue to occur. Unfortunately, some of those are required for us to adopt it first before we go through their processes. So if there's an edit that they ask us to make as a part of their approval process, we would come back and do a quick amendment.
Cool. Okay. Commissioner Copley.
I think this would fall under the news and resources on planning topics, but I thought it would be timely to share that the first city in the U.S. that enacted single-family zoning was Berkeley, California in 1916, and their planning commission has been meeting this week to change that zoning to allow for more density and affordability. So Timely news.
So that's it for the monthly update, unless you have any other questions for me about what's coming. Okay.
No, it doesn't look like it.
I'm sorry?
It doesn't look like it. I think we're good. The one question I had on the incentives chapter, so this is just what will be in the zoning code, is that correct? Or where does that go? Where does it fit?
So I have to identify what we are going to number it, where it's going to live. And that's one of the things that Kim Dietz and I are working on, is where that home will be. All of the incentives, except for just like the green building program, is going to live on its own, right? But all of the incentives will move into that chapter. So right now we have the overlake incentives actually in 2112. We'll strike them from 2112 in that package because we'll just do a cross-reference and just say, see the incentive over in this chapter. One of the reasons why we want to do that is because we want to use a lot of the same incentives throughout every center. And so if we just have one big old table and we just have the overlake columns and the Marymore columns and the downtown columns, that allows us to not have to redo those tables. And so each zone in and of itself will just have a cross-reference to the incentive tables.
That sounds gorgeous. So I love tables. And then one more question just on that chapter. When we will be reviewing that, is that the sort of thing where that's the final material that would be available, or will there be additional, like later stage materials on the planning site or something for other people to use?
So we are hoping to finish an initial draft, and that might still be a sketchy outline draft in some pieces of it, but we're trying to get a final proposed incentive chapter by the end of September. And so as you start to review the actual red lines, one of your packages will include the proposed incentive chapter. And then as community engagement, as testing, we might evolve and change a few things. But like one of the complicating factors is in Overlake, you can go up to 30 stories, but in downtown and Marymore, you can only go to 12. And if we do some things in mixed use, they can only go to 8. And so we have to recalibrate that system to where it's the same tables, but it actually just gets you to where you're only allowed to go. And so there's some work that we need to do, which is why the first draft of that might be more of a, here's everything that we want to include, but the actual numbers might not be finalized yet. So we might bring it to you in stages as we work through that. But the consultant is in the middle of testing some of the cost evaluations of a number of those pieces. We are updating the mass timber prototype to a 12-story so that it matches what we want to see in downtown and Marymore. So there's a number of just work that's underway to get us to that point, but you will not see an initial draft of that chapter for a couple of months.
Commissioner Aparna.
Question. So the green building one and the affordability incentives will stand on their own. Are we getting to see them again, or have you already seen them? I'm so sorry, but my head's muddled.
So the green building program in and of itself, you won't see again, but there's a couple of things that we're working on that we may open up 2167. Again, we're discussing about whether or not internally, do we want to take the 4 mandatory overlay green building pieces and just say that all centers are mandatory? And if that's the case, we might put those in 2167 and in the zone just cross-reference over there. Again, so that we're not repeating the same language over and over again. So there might be some things we want to tweak in 2167, but we won't actually redo the program. Yeah, if that makes sense. And then the affordable housing mandatory pieces stay in 2120, but the incentive program for going above and beyond the mandatory is actually going to be in the incentives chapter. So it's like what we did in Overlake. If you want to keep going and move past that and really produce, those pieces will actually be in that new chapter. Okay. We'll just have a cross-reference to it so that everybody can go through and find it. Okay.
All right,
Okay.
thank you.
All right, thank you.
Right, so at this point, I think we'll move on to staff and commissioner updates. Apologies before.
There are no staff considerations, but there is scheduling considerations, and that is because of the actions taken here tonight. Planning Commission has a vacation for August, We will not have a meeting on August 14th, and we will not have a meeting on August 28th. Now, all of staff, of course, will be available for any questions, considerations, thoughts. Redmond Planning Commission at redmond.gov, or just to Ian or Glenn or Becky. We will respond, of course, as normal. So our next Planning Commission meeting is September 11th. Same place, same time. The second update here is that we still have tons of snacks and cookies, so please grab some on your way out.
Amazing. Thank you. And with that, any commissioner updates, actually, first? Commissioner Copley.
Just that mine was early. Sorry. I gave mine before I was supposed to. So, same update though.
We'll mentally move it to now. All right. Well, in that case, I look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Right. Then we are adjourned.